I know we're in the library, but it's okay to talk back. So, hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good morning, and welcome to the African American Read In, which is a read in that has been established nationally to recognize Black and African American authors and writers and musicians and poets. And this is a time designated where we will hear words written from that particular culture and that type of thinking. We are excited for those who are here today that are on the program. Before we get started, I would like to do just a few what I call housekeeping items. Number one is we'd like to just thank Christine Kickles. And Christine, if you could just wave your hand back there. If you don't mind giving her a round of applause, I would appreciate that. She's been phenomenal in helping, along with the library, and collaborating with my office, which is the Center for Student Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at College DuPage, and bringing this programming here at the college. We've been doing this now for many years. I think it goes back over 10 years now, where it was brought to the College of DuPage by the African and African Diaspora Committee years ago. And since then, we've been able to continue it. We have done it throughout the last several years, and we're glad to be back in person again, I think, for our second year since actually the quarantine. So we're excited here. What I'd like to do now is tell you there's a little bit of information that you can scan if, Josh, if you want to put the QR code for Black History Month programming throughout the rest of the month. So you can scan the QR code. There's posters around the campus as well, so you can see the list of events and programming and teaching and learning experiences that we have programmed for the remainder of the month. This month's theme is Black Resistance, and that theme comes from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which was established by Carter G. Woodson, who built in Black History Week, and then it was extended to Black History Month. And so that's where we get the theme from. And we're really excited about a reader that's going to come up who's associated with that organization and do some reading today as well. So before we get into that, our reading, I'd like to introduce to you the one that will be our MC, if you will, our facilitator for our time together, Dr. Peter James, who is an associate professor of business. He's also an innovator. He is a business-minded person. He works with the Entrepreneurship Student Club. So for those who are in the mind of business, Peter would really be a great resource. He's also a veteran who has served this country, so we want to thank you, Peter, for that as well, as Dr. Caputo, who is also a veteran. So we want to just give a nod and acknowledgement to our veterans. But Peter is also an authentic and down-to-earth person. He's really relatable to all of the students. So we're just thrilled and excited that he has agreed to facilitate this time together. So without further ado, once again, I know we're in the library, but it's okay to make a little bit of noise, and let's welcome Peter James as he facilitates.
Folks, before we even get started, let's give a hand for David Swope, who's helping to put this together as well. A lot of great stuff going on here on the campus at the College of DuPage, and this Black History Month that we celebrate every year here in the United States. The College of DuPage has been so gracious to also have the African American read-in, National African American read-in, as you see here. So those of you who are participating, I'm so excited to witness and listen to your excerpts. But those of you who have not historically participated or are kind of hesitant, you're shy, this is your time to step out for sure. I've done this numerous times. I look to do it and participate in this every year. Those of you who are in attendance, again, thank you so much for your attentiveness. Thank you so much for those who are coming and going. Know that we all have tasks throughout the day. But let's get started without further ado. I would like to bring up our distinguished College of DuPage president, Dr. Brian Caputo, who will be reading an excerpt from the book by Jesse Owens, a book about Jesse Owens, A Life in American History, by F. Eric Brooks and Kevin Jones. Without further ado, let's give a round of applause for Dr. Caputo.
Thank you, David and Peter, two of my favorite people, most favorite people on the planet.
enjoy working with them. And thank you so much for being here with us this morning. This is a real integral part of Black History Month, our observance of Black History Month here at College of DuPage. And today you're going to hear from a number of members of the college community that are going to celebrate African American literature, not only from yesteryear, but we'll hear, I think, from some current authors and makers of history around the world. As was mentioned, I'd like to start with reading a passage from Jesse Owens, A Life in American History by F. Eric Brooks and Kevin M. Jones. And I'm reading from a chapter that's entitled Race, Politics, and Adolf Hitler. Since the arrival of the first 20 Americans to the shores of the Virginia colony on the land that would become the United States in 1619, the dilemma of race has been a contentious matter for the country and has produced a paradox for African Americans in the United States. This paradox has forced many African Americans to be in a perpetual state of attempting to prove their intellectual prowess and self-worth. W.E.B. Du Bois described this concept as a two-ness or double consciousness. Du Bois specifically described it as follows. It is a particular sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of the world that looks in an amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. This merging he wishes neither of his older selves to be lost. In this merging, wishes that neither of the older selves to be lost. He does not wish to Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world and Africa. He wouldn't want to bleach his Negro blood in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world also. He simply wishes to make it possible for the man to be both a Negro and an American without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity roughly close roughly in his face. Jesse Owens was constantly faced with this two-ness, and this would become a force as he come to the fore as he trained for the Olympic track and field team and competed through the backdrop of racism, racial cleansing, and Nazi Germany. Racism is a concept that is difficult to define by a measure of exactness. African Americans have dealt with racism, stereotypes, and myths, especially in regard to their intellectual and athletic abilities in the world of sports. White supremacy and the ideas associated with this mindset have been used to justify racism in the United States. Although white supremacy and racism are not strictly American phenomena, in the United States, white supremacist thought has been justified and used in politics to guide public policy since the beginning of the country. Stereotypes of race issues have been prevalent in American sports. They served as a backdrop to American collegiate sports as Owens entered college and would be a constant of the 1936 Olympic Games. The contemporary world is filled with stereotypical images of African American athletes. It has been erroneously thought that black athletes are born with natural athletic ability. There have been sportscasters that have described a black athlete as a natural, as if to intimate that the athlete is free from thinking and that his athletic ability or talent has been rendered from some cosmic force or by nature, while white athletes have generally been described as crafty, cagey, and smart. American sports and African American athleticism have also become part of the collective sport folklore. The physical feats of black athletes have become metaphors for what African Americans might do to level the playing field in other aspects of society. This was especially on display at the 1936 Summer Olympics when Jesse Owens and other African American athletes and the collective African American community supported and celebrated every Olympic event in which the African American athletes competed. Initially, Jesse was hesitant about participating in the Olympic Games. There were calls for athletes to protest the Games because of the treatment of Jews in Germany and African Americans in the United States. However, many African American newspapers opposed the boycott of the 1936 Olympics. Black journalists often underscored the hypocrisy of pro-boycotters who did not first address the problem of discrimination against black athletes in the United States. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Caputo. In all of these excerpts, you're going to hear some history, some insights that we often don't just get from regular or average textbooks. So again, kudos to you all for being here to pull back the layers to a certain extent. We're going to continue on that theme for sure as we have our distinguished Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here who will be speaking about The Transformation of Silence into Action, the text by Audre Lorde. Our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is Jill Salas. Jill, good morning to you and welcome. Let's give her a hand, folks.
Thank you, Dr. James. This reading selection is entitled The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action by Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde was an American writer, womanist, radical feminist, professor, and civil rights activist. She was self-described as Black, lesbian, feminist, socialist, mother, warrior, poet. What a list. I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. That the speaking profits me beyond any other effect. I am standing here as a Black lesbian poet in the meaning of all that waits upon the fact that I am still alive and might not have been. Less than 2 months ago, I was told by 2 doctors, one female and one male, that I would have to have breast surgery and that there was a 60 to 80% chance that the tumor was malignant. Between that telling and the actual surgery, there was a 3-week period of that agony of an involuntary reorganization of my entire life. The surgery was completed and the growth was benign. In becoming forcibly and essentially aware of my mortality and of what I had wished and wanted for my life, however short it might be, priorities and omissions became strongly etched in a merciless light. And what I most regretted were my silences. Of what had I ever been afraid? To question or to speak as I believed could have meant pain or death. But we all hurt in so many different ways all the time, and pain will either change or end. Death, on the other hand, is the final silence. And I began to recognize a source of power within myself that comes from the knowledge that while it is most desirable not to be afraid, learning to put fear into a perspective gave me great strength. I was going to die, if not sooner than later, whether or not I had ever spoken it myself. My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. But for every real word spoken, for every attempt I'd ever made to speak those truths for which I am still seeking, I'd made contact with other women while we examined the words to fit a world in which we all believed, bridging our differences. The women who sustained me through that period were Black and white, old and young, lesbian, bisexual, and heterosexual, and we all shared a war against the tyrannies of silence. They all gave me a strength and concern without which I could not have survived intact. Within those weeks of acute fear came the knowledge, within the war we are waging within the forces of death, subtle and otherwise, conscious or not. I am not only a casualty, I am also a warrior. What are the words you do not yet have? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you sicken and die of them, and still in silence? Perhaps for some of you here today, I am the face of one of your fears. Because I'm a woman, because I'm Black, because I'm lesbian, because I am myself. A Black woman warrior poet doing my work. Come to ask you, are you doing yours? And of course I'm afraid, because the transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation, and that always seems fraught with danger. But my daughter, when I told her of our topic and my difficulty with it, said, tell them about how you're never really a whole person if you remain silent, because there's always that one little piece inside you that wants to be spoken out. And if you keep ignoring it, it gets madder and madder and hotter and hotter. And if you don't speak it out one day, it will just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside. In the cause of silence, each of us draws the face of our own fear, fear of contempt, of censure, of some judgment, or recognition, of challenge, of annihilation. But most of all, I think we fear the visibility without which we cannot truly live. Within this country, where racial difference creates a constant, if unspoken, distortion of vision, Black women have, on one hand, have always been highly visible, and so on the other hand, have been rendered invisible through the depersonalization of racism. Even within the women's movement, we've had to fight, and still do, for that very visibility, which also renders us most vulnerable, our Blackness. For to survive in the mouth of the dragon we call America, we've had to learn this first and most vital lesson, that we were never meant to survive, not as human beings, and neither were most of you here today, Black or not. And that visibility which makes us most vulnerable is that which also is the source of our greatest strength, because the machine will try to grind you into dust anyway, whether or not we speak. We can sit in our corners mute forever while our sisters and ourselves are wasted, while our children are distorted and destroyed, while our earth is poisoned. We can sit in our safe corners, mute as bottles, and we will still be no less afraid. In the transformation of silence into language and action, it is vitally necessary for each one of us to establish or examine her function, and that the transformation, and to recognize her role as vital within that transformation. For those of us who write, it is necessary to scrutinize not only the truth of what we speak, but the truth of that language by which we speak it. For others, it is to share and spread also those words that are meaningful to us. But primarily for us all, it is necessary to teach by living and speaking those truths which we believe and know beyond understanding. Because in this way alone we can survive by taking part in a process of life that is creative and continuing. That is growth. And it is never without fear of visibility, of the harsh light, of scrutiny, and perhaps judgment, of pain, of death. But we have lived through all of those already, in silence, except death. And I remind myself all the time now that if I were to have been born mute or had maintained an oath of silence my whole life long for safety, I would have still suffered, and I would still die. It is very good for establishing perspective. And where the words of women are crying to be heard, we must each of us recognize that our responsibility to seek those words out, to read them and share them, and examine them in their pertinence to our lives, that we not hide behind the mockeries of separations that have been imposed upon us, and which so often we accept as our own. For instance, I can't possibly teach Black women's writing. Their experience is so different from mine. Yet how many of you spend teaching Plato and Shakespeare and Proust? Or another, she's a white woman and what could she possibly have to say to me? Or she's a lesbian, what would my husband say, or my chairman? Or again, this woman writes of her sons and I have no children. And all the other endless ways in which we rob ourselves and of each other. We can learn to work and speak when we are afraid in the same way we have learned to work and speak when we are tired. For we've been socialized to respect fear more than our own needs for language and definition. And while we wait in silence for that final luxury of fearlessness, the weight of that silence will choke us. The fact that we are here and that I speak these words is an attempt to break that silence and bridge some of those differences between us. For it is not difference which immobilizes us, but silence. And there are so many silences to be broken.
Thank you, Jill. As I mentioned, while we'll get a lot of reflection on the history of the African American plight, we'll also hear a little bit about what Jill had described so eloquently, the pain that comes from the writing and the pain that existed over the years. We'll continue in that theme with Professor Karen Evans, good morning, where she will be reading an excerpt from All That She Carried by Taya Miles. Taya Miles. Good morning. Let's give her a hand, folks.
Thank you all so much for coming. This event means a lot to me. I'm so glad that we do it. This book, All That She Carried, The Journey of Ashley's Sack, A Black Family Keepsake, is an incredibly moving and startling, unusual book. It was given to me as a Christmas gift, and it was one of those times when you know someone gives you a gift and they give you exactly the right gift because that person kind of knows your soul. So I'm going to read a couple passages from the introduction. Here in these pages, we take up a quiet story of transformative love lived and told by ordinary African American women, Rose, Ashley, and Ruth, whose lives spanned the 19th and 20th centuries, slavery and freedom, the South and the North. Their love story is one of sacrifice, suffering, lament, and the rescue of a tested but resilient family lineage. By loving, Rose refused to accept the tenets of her time, that people could be treated as property, that wealth was a greater value than honor, that some lives had no worth beyond capital and gain. Hers is just one telling example of refusal from the collective experience of enslaved Black women who practiced love and preserved life when all hope seemed lost. Even when she relinquished her daughter to the slave trade against her will, Rose insisted on love. Despite and during their separation, Rose's value of love prevailed. The emotional bond between mother and daughter held longevity and elasticity, traversing the final decade of chattel slavery, the chaos of the Civil War, and the red dawn of emancipation, before finding new expression in the early 20th century, just as a baby girl, the fifth generation of Rose's lineage, Ashley's great-granddaughter, was born. Just as remarkable as this story of women who dared to insist on love is how we have come to know about it. Rose's testament, as told by Ruth, is preserved on an antique sack that once held grain or seeds. Traces of the abused and adored, the devalued and the salvaged, the lost and the found, accrue in this one-of-a-kind object. A mother bears the sacrifice of her daughter, a daughter carries on amid unspeakable loss, a descendant heaves the harrowing tale into the 20th century, and we have the chance to be the better for its arrival here on our doorstep. Through the medium of the sack, we glimpse the visionary fortitude of enslaved Black mothers, the miraculous love Black women bore for kin, the insistence on radical humanization that Black women carried for the nation, and the immeasurable value of material culture to the histories of the marginalized. Although Black women have been treated like the mules of the world, in the words of writer Zora Neale Hurston, this sack bears them up as at times exemplifying, to borrow Abraham Lincoln's phrase on the precipice of the Civil War, the better angels of our nature. Ruth Middleton, a lineal descendant of Rose, embroidered the lines that follow on what Ruth identified as the original cotton sack Rose packed. And these are the embroidered lines. My great-grandmother Rose, mother of Ashley, gave her this sack when she was sold at age 9 in South Carolina. It held a tattered dress, 3 handfuls of pecans, a braid of Rose's hair. Told her, it be filled with my love always. She never saw her again. Ashley is my grandmother, Ruth Middleton, 1921. With these words, a granddaughter, mother, sewer, and storyteller imbued a piece of fabric with all the drama and pathos of ancient tapestries depicting the deeds of queens and goddesses. She preserved the memory of her foremothers and also venerated these women, shaping their image for the next generations. Without Ruth, there would be no record. Without her record, there would be no history. Ruth's act of creation mirrored that of her great-grandmother Rose. Through her embroidery, Ruth ensured that the valiance of discounted women would be recalled and embraced as a treasured inheritance. Next, I'll read a passage about Rose packing the bag for her 9-year-old daughter, Ashley. Rose took a planful step. She packed a bag to aid in an unpredictable journey. It is rare that we get to peer inside one of the hastily prepared bundles that sold or escaping enslaved people grasped in times of sudden change. Rose's bag, enhanced by her great-granddaughter's inscription, allows us an illuminating visibility. Each item Rose packed for so significant a parting was both essential and versatile. The tattered dress, listed first, could protect a body from exposure and shield an enslaved girl's inner dignity. What is more, a different item of clothing, such as a dress an individual had not yet worn, could also function as a costume, altering that person's external identity and thereby aiding escape. This is why many accounts of enslaved people who took their own freedom include cross-gender dressing or wearing someone else's clothes. The dress Rose packed also had another potential function. As fabric stored wealth, especially for women who used cloth as currency or a trade good. Although Rose seemed to have packed a shredded dress most valuable for its personal meaning, she must have also recognized that Ashley could repurpose the fabric or trade it. Next, Rose packed pecans, a concentrated energy source and a specialty food in the 1850s Low Country that Ashley could have eaten to stave off hunger or bartered for another necessity. Rose also tucked a lock of hair, her own hair, into the bag, the most unusual element in her care package. While hair seems at first a whimsy in an emergency bag such as this, it may be the most potent item, symbolically and even spiritually, that Rose packed that day. For hair may offer a glimpse into Rose's beliefs about spirit power, transcendent connection, and the importance of carrying on a sense of lineage. Rose's packing priorities, clothing, food, and a token of memory, mirrored the material agendas of other enslaved people as reflected in letters, narratives, and plantation store ledgers. Her packing also revealed a collective hierarchy of human need. Food was included, clothing was there. Only physical shelter was missing, or was it? The sack itself, over 2 feet long and more than 1 foot wide, notably large enough for a young child to partially crawl into, could have served as a tented covering, a pillow, a blanket, or a sleeping bag along the road of Ashley's forced journey. And more than this, Rose transferred another kind of protective structure through her parting words. The emotional shelter of love eternal would travel with Ashley inside the sack. Fitted to a range of needs, physical, emotional, and spiritual, Rose's kit was ingenious. So I'll just end by reading the author, a very short biography of the author, just from the back of the book, those kinds of things. Tia Miles is a professor of history, a Radcliffe alumni professor at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and director of the Charles Warren Center for Studies in American History at Harvard University. She's a recipient of a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship and the Hyatt Prize in the Humanities from the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture. Her book, The Dawn of Detroit, received the Merle Curti Award in Social History, the James A. Raleigh Prize in Race Relations, the James Bradford Biography Prize, the Hurston Wright Legacy Award in Nonfiction, an American Book Award, and a Frederick Douglass Book Prize. So that book was The Dawn of Detroit, which you can bet is on my reading list. Miles is also the author of Ties That Bind, The House on Diamond Hill, The Cherokee Rose, a novel of gardens and ghosts, and Tales from the Haunted South, a published lecture series. The artifact, the sack, Ashley's sack, is currently, as I understand it, on display in the African American Museum from the Smithsonian Museum in D.C. So it's actually able to be viewed. It belongs to a more local museum in South Carolina, which is where it's from. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Truly appreciate that. And those of you who have never had the privilege of visiting the National African American Museum in Washington, D.C., I highly encourage you. Amongst all the museums there, one of the best ones on site at our nation's capital. You learn so much history. And speaking of history, I was thinking as Karen was reading her excerpt, do we really know history if we don't really know the full history? If we don't know the diverse history, the perspectives that oftentimes are present in an event such as the National African American Read-In. A little bit of history, if I could, before I introduce our following speaker. The National African American Read-In is a groundbreaking effort to encourage communities to read together, centering African American books and authors. It was established in 1990 by the Black Caucus of the National Council of Teachers of English to make literacy a significant part of Black History Month. This initiative has reached more than 6 million participants around the world, to include all of you here today. During the month of February, schools, churches, libraries, bookstores, communities, and professional organizations, and even interested citizens are urged to make literacy a significant part of Black History Month by hosting an African American read-in. Hosting one can be as simple as bringing together friends to share a book, or as elaborate as arranging public readings and media presentations as we have today that feature professional African American writers. Once again, thank you to the College of DuPage and the College of DuPage Library for hosting this distinguished event today. What I love about events like this is it's not only beneficial that we hear from our staff, our employees, and our faculty, but also from our students. So without further ado, I would love to bring up a student, Fasika Hailu. Fasika, hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. She will be reading a passage. Absolutely, let's give her a hand. She will be reading 400 Souls, and the passage is called Black Lives Matter by Alicia Garza. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fasika Hailu. The reason why I decided to read from 400 Souls is because I got this book when I first came to COD. And the book is unique because it's filled with multiple authors, and they take a section in time in African history. It's really beneficial to students, at least, because in our history books, they didn't teach us about half of the things that are in these books. So I will be reading from the chapter Black Lives Matter, which is the last chapter by Alicia Garza. Change does not occur without backlash, at least any change worth having, and that backlash is an indicator that the change is so powerful that the opposing forces resist that change with everything they have. On August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown was shot and killed by police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, a small suburb outside St. Louis. His body lay in the street for 4 hours as angry crowds gathered, demanding to know why an 18-year-old boy had been shot and killed by police just steps away from his mother's home. After Brown was shot, he reportedly was still alive, and yet he was denied medical attention. Later that afternoon, the crowd erupted and began to march to the Ferguson police station a few blocks away. What unfolded that fateful day is painful and complex. It is a story that the people who joined in the uprising that day and in the days, weeks, months, and years afterwards are most fit to tell. Storytelling is often connected to power and influence, and even today the voices of activists in Ferguson, from their own perspectives and viewpoints, are too hard to come by and often eclipsed by those who want to center themselves within a story that is not their own. Such has been the case with Black Lives Matter, which I started with Patrisse Cullors and Opal Tometi, a little more than a year prior to Brown's death, after the acquittal in 2013 of George Zimmerman and the murder of Trayvon Martin, a Black teenager in Sanford, Florida. Such has been the case with all social movements as we seek to best understand their origins, their impacts, their failures, and their methods and strategies. There are lessons that can be drawn from this tapestry of stories that point to a simple truth. Black lives still do not matter in American society. Whether it be the murder of Trayvon Martin by a vigilant, the murder of Michael Brown by a local police officer, the murder of Renisha McBride by a private citizen, the murder of Kayla Moore by police officers, the murder of Mia Henderson, or the mysterious death of Sandra Bland, who was found dead in a jail cell she should not have been in after a routine traffic stop. Black lives, be they poor or middle class, transgender or cisgender, disabled, adult, or children, are seen as disposable. The movement addressing this simple yet painful truth has deep historical roots. It has emerged from previous iterations not only to fight back against the state-sanctioned violence occurring against Black people each and every day. The movement has declared that all Black lives are worth fighting for. This Black Renaissance understands that it is not only cisgender, heterosexual, middle-class Black people who deserve to live full and dignified lives, but also Black people who are subject to discrimination, oppression, marginalization of many types all at once. It is this Black Renaissance that propelled activists to refuse to allow traditional Black church leaders to speak on their behalf, to tell them to go home in the dead of the night and be content with allowing the system to run its course as Michael Brown lay dying in the street. It is this Black Renaissance that declares that that the lives of Black transgender women must not end in homicide before they are 35 years old. It is this Black Renaissance that refuses to make the coffee and the copies while the men do the real work. It is this Black Renaissance that questions the stated role of policing in this country and that calls attention to the Black disabled people who are killed at 8 times the rate of people who are not disabled. This Black Renaissance has dutifully carried on the tradition of resistance that our ancestors gifted us, and has continued to push for the changes that they did not complete. A looming question faces anti-racist social movements in the United States. Will the backlash become a force powerful enough to prevail, or will our organizing become stronger and sharper in the face of such backlash, assured that the presence alone has already declared our victory? Only time and strategic organizing will tell the next 400 years of African America. Thank you.
Thank you so much there, Fasika. Very good insight, for sure. Before I proceed, I want to take us back a little bit. Sometimes in our society, we are perplexed on why we have to analyze or reflect or study different history, in this case, Black history. Why might it be important to the history of the United States of America? Why do we even have Black History Month just in general? For those of us who don't quite understand the history of this, please allow me to dive into this for just a little bit in preparation for our next presenter. In 1915, in response to the lack of information on the accomplishments of Black people available to the public, historian Carter G. Woodson co-founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. In 1926, the group declared the second week of February as Negro History Week. To recognize the contributions of African Americans to U.S. history, few people have studied Black history, and it was never included in textbooks prior to the creation of Negro History Week. This week was chosen because it included the birthdays of Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist, someone who wanted to end the practice of enslaving people, and former U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. President Lincoln led the United States during the Civil War, which was primarily fought over the enslavement of Black people in the country. Many schools and leaders began recognizing the week after its creation. The week-long event officially became Black History Month in 1976 when U.S. President Gerald Ford extended the recognition to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. Black History Month has been celebrated in the United States every February ever since. So thank you all for that brief moment there. I would love to introduce Professor Shaheen Chowdhury, who will be taking us on a journey talking about Sojourner Truth. So excited to hear about this, Professor. Let's give her a round of applause, folks.
Hi, everybody. I will be reading a poem by Sojourner Truth, which is, this is called Ain't I a Woman? I do it every year. I love this. It touched my heart when I first read this. And ever since then, ever since this started, I've been reading this as my first poem. And then I'll read 3 short poems. So let me do this. Ain't I a Woman by Sojourner Truth. That man over there say a woman needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helped me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me a best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me, look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get to it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, and seen most all sold into slavery. And when I cried out a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? That little man in black there say a woman can't have as much rights as a man, 'cause Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, together women ought to be able to turn it right side up again. So my second poem, or all my 3 poems come from this book, Life with Margaret, and I'll be reading 3 short ones from here. This one's called I Am a Woman. I am a woman, I'm a Black woman. I'm happy to be a woman, even though in my lifetime I have been and am being now denied and denigrated as a lesser human being. I am a woman. I'm a proud Black woman. And even though I'm called a minority, yet I am happy to be what I am. This being a woman and this being Black forces me to bear a double burden, yet I bear it bravely and with courage. I am a woman. I'm a courageous Black woman. I wear many hats because I have many things to do. These I must do in order to get the job done, and I must get the job done. I am a woman. I'm a determined Black woman. My children require much of me, and I serve them willingly. I'm a role player, but as well, I must be a role model. I must be not only mother, but sometimes father and uncle and aunt, as well as sister, brother, and friend. I am a woman. I'm a kind Black woman. I'm strong because so many strong Black women have set the pattern for me. Thus, I follow in the footsteps of women like Harriet Tubman, Moses of our people, and Sojourner, the seeker after truth, and Mary Bethune, who started the school on faith, and Ida Wells Barnett, a crusader for justice, and Shirley Graham Du Bois, a gifted author, and many, many others who will remain unnamed and unknown. Humbly and gratefully, I pay homage to them all. I am a woman. I'm a Black woman. I will unite with all women, Black, brown, red, yellow, and white. And all together, we will be able to set this upside-down country right side up again, and thus work to make a decent life for all of God's children. I am a woman. I'm a black woman. I'm a giver of life. I'm a lover of peace. I'm against death and destruction. I am with my sisters wherever they are in this wide, wide world. I am a woman. I'm a black woman. My next one is called Let It Be Known, very short one. Let it be known to all the story of the glorious struggle of my people. Let it be known that black men and women helped to build this country. Let it be known that black men and women of the past, in an effort to make this country what it ought to be, gave up their very last to make America a real democracy, a true homeland of the free. Let our leaders of today go back into the past and come fighting forth envigored with the spirit of Turner and Vesey, Douglas, Tubman, and Shute. Let our black youth lift their heads in pride and tell of their fathers' fight for freedom to the white youth by their side. Yes, let it be known. Let all of the old folks tell it. Sing it to the babies yet in arms. Let us read the glorious story right along with our Bible. Let it be known to all. The story of the glorious struggles of my people. Too long has it been kept from us. My last one is called Advice to the Youth. Be yourself, be what you are. You are unique, you are precious. There's no one else like you. You are special. Be happy with yourself, just as you are. Tall, short, plump, and slim. Skin, black, white, red, brown, or yellow. Eyes, black, brown, blue, gray, or green. Lips, full, thin, or in between. Be yourself. Be exactly what you are. Be yourself. Love yourself. You are unique. You are rare. You are precious. Be yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shaheen, for that wonderful excerpt from Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman? I actually watched a documentary the other day on PBS about Harriet Tubman. You know, sometimes you think you know the story about the Underground Railroad, as an example, but then when you go a little bit deeper and read or watch, in this case, as there's so many documentaries on television or even on YouTube, you find out the depth. So unbeknownst to me, Harriet Tubman served in the U.S. military and was very instrumental in helping during the Civil War, especially freeing slaves who were trying to get away from the South. So again, even those things like that are not easily displayed or communicated to us as we're going through our traditional education. Black History Month was also created to focus attention on the contributions of African Americans to the United States. It honors all black people from all periods of U.S. history, from the enslaved people first brought over from Africa in the early 17th century to African Americans living in the U.S. today. Among notable figures often spotlighted during Black History Month are, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who fought for equal rights for the blacks during 1950s and 1960s. Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American justice appointed to the United States Supreme Court in 1967. Mae Jemison, who became the first female African-American astronaut to travel to space in 1992. And of course, our very own Barack Obama, who was elected the first ever African-American president of the United States in 2008. Just a little bit more history. But without further ado, let's jump into our next excerpt, which in this case will be our counseling faculty who are well represented here today, Professor Devin Chambers, who will be speaking the bigger picture from Lil Baby. Let's give him a hand, folks.
Thanks, Swope. Dr. Chambers now. So I'm going to be reading Bigger Picture by Dominique Armani Jones, a.k.a. Little Baby. I'm not going to be rapping, by the way. Just reading. I know. You wanted to see rapping. I find it crazy the police will shoot you and know that you're dead, but still tell you to freeze. Fucked up by seeing what I seen. I guess that mean hold them down if you say you can't breathe. It's too many mothers that's grieving. They killing us for no reason. Been going on for too long to get even. Throw us in cages like dogs and hyenas. I went to court and they sent me to prison. My mama was crushed when they said I can't leave. First I was drunk, then I sobered up quick when I heard all that time that they gave to Talib. He got a life sentence plus. We just some products of our environment. How the fuck they gonna blame us? You can't fight fire with fire. I know, but at least we can turn up the flame some. Every colored person ain't dumb, and all whites are not racist. I be judging by the mind and the heart. I ain't really into faces. Fucked up the way that we livin' is not getting better. You gotta know how to survive. Crazy. I had to tell all my loved ones to carry a gun when they going outside. Stare in the mirror wherever you drive. Overprotected, go crazy for mine. You gotta pay attention to the signs. Seems like the blind are following the blind. Thinking about everything that's going on. I boost security up in my home. I'm with my kind if they right or they wrong. I call him now, I'll pick up the phone. It's 5 in the morning, he waking up on it. Tell him wherever I'm at. Then they come in. I see blue lights, I get scared and start running. That shit be crazy, they supposed to protect us. Throw us in handcuffs and arrest us. While they go home at night, that shit messed up. Knowing we needed help, they neglect us. Wondering who gonna make them respect us. I'll say that again. Wondering who gonna make them respect us. I can see in your eye that you fed up. Fuck around, got my shot, I won't let up. They know that we a problem together. They know that we can storm any weather. It's bigger than black and white. It's a problem with the whole way of life. It can't change overnight. But we gotta start somewhere. Might as well go start here. We done had a hell of a year. I'm gonna make it count while I'm here. God is the only man I fear. Every video I see on my conscience, I got power. Now I gotta say something. Corrupted police been the problem where I'm from. But I'd be lying if I said it was all of them. I ain't do this for the trend. I don't follow them. Altercations with the law had a lot of them. People speaking for the people. I'm proud of them. Stick together. We can't get up out of them. I can't lie, I don't rap about killing and dope, but I'm telling my youngins to vote. I did what I did because I didn't have no choice or no hope. I was forced to just jump in and go. That bullshit is all that we know. But it's time for a change. Gotta be serious, no time for games. We ain't taking no more. Let us go from them change. God bless their souls, every one of them names. It's bigger than black and white. It's a problem with the whole way of life. It can't change overnight. But we gotta start somewhere. Might as well go and start here. We done had a hell of a year. I'll make it count while I'm here. God is the only man I fear. They training officers to kill us. They shooting protesters with these rubber bullets. They regular people, I know that they feel it. These scars too deep to heal us. What happened to COVID? Nobody remember. It ain't making sense. I'm just here to vent. It happened to one of your people. It's different. We get it. The system is wicked. Just learn how to pick it. Knowledge is power. I swear I'm a witness. I know that I'm gifted. I won't go too deep because I'm scared they'll get me. Ain't scared to admit it. Some shit I can't mention. It's people who can't, well, here's the chance. I won't take the stand, but I'll stand for what I believe. Must not be breathing the air that I breathe. You know that the way I bleed, you can bleed. I never been a fan of police, but my neighborhood know I try to keep the peace, so it's only right that I get in these streets. March for a reason, not just on GP. Our people died for us to be free. Fuck do you mean? This was a dream. Now we got the power that we need to have. They don't want us with it, and that's why they mad. It's bigger than black and white. It's a problem with the whole way of life. It can't change overnight, but we gotta start somewhere. Might as well go start here. We done had a hell of a year. I'm gonna make it count while I hear. God is the only man I fear. Thank you.
Powerful, powerful. You know what I love about Black History Month, or even just Black history, is again pulling back the layers. Oftentimes, if I ask each and every one of you, tell me a little bit about your family lineage, your history, and going back. Some of you will be able to tell me stories about your grandfather, your great-grandfather who did this or came over across the water from Europe or served. Or in my family, if you ask me about my lineage, I won't be able to give you all of those details. I'll actually be able to give you more details about the plantations that my ancestors were served on, or were enslaved on. the pain that it caused. And what's interesting is, right, today more than ever, we are embracing pain and understanding pain. And we hear it be manifest in depression, anxiety, and we understand and we empathize. And then when someone is suicidal, we understand. In the African American community, it happens more than we even know. Even in my own family, I was just in Dallas last weekend and embracing the lineage and how that has been passed down from generation to generation, and how it passes down into depression and anxiety and so many other physical and psychological and mental challenges. What I love about hip hop is that as African American people, we have been able to channel that pain, that anxiety, that frustration into a form of art. And I love it because of how even just Devin was able to communicate it so eloquently by one of our rap and hip hop stars of today. But truth be told, understand the history of even that in what we're discussing today. Since the first Negro History Week in 1926, other countries have joined the United States in celebrating Black people and their contributions to history and culture, including Canada, the United Kingdom, Germany, and the Netherlands. Today, Black History Month continues the discussion of Black people and their contributions through activities such as museums, museum exhibits, and film screenings, and by encouraging the study of achievements by African Americans year-round. So folks, without further ado, let's jump into another excerpt, again, by our counseling faculty. I have Professor Dana Thompson, who will be reading an excerpt from Dr. Martin Luther King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? Let's please give her a hand.
So I'm going to be reading Where Do We Go From Here, excerpts from it. This was Dr. King made this speech at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference on August 16, 1967. It was his last time speaking there, so here we go. Now, in order to answer the question, where do we go from here, which is our theme, we must first honestly recognize where we are now. When the Constitution was written, a strange formula to determine taxers and representation declared the Negro was 60% of a person. Today, another curious formula seems to declare that he is 50% of a person. Of the good things in life, the Negro has approximately 1/2 of those of whites. Of the bad things in life, he has twice those of whites. Thus, half of all Negroes live in substandard housing, and Negroes have half of the income of whites. When we view the negative experiences of life, the Negro has double share. There are twice as many unemployed. The infant mortality among Negroes is double of whites, and there are twice as many Negroes dying in Vietnam as whites in proportion to their size in the population. In other spheres, the figures are equally alarming. In elementary schools, Negroes lag 1 to 3 years behind whites, and their segregated schools receive substantially less money per student than white schools. 1/20 as many Negroes as whites attend college. Of employed Negroes, 75% hold meaningless jobs. And he goes on. I'm not concerned about a better world. I'm concerned about justice. I'm concerned about brotherhood. I'm concerned about truth. When one is concerned about that, he can never advocate violence, though violence may murder a murderer, but it can't murder murder. Through violence, you may murder a liar, but you can't establish the truth. Through violence, you may murder a hater, but you can't murder hate through violence. Darkness cannot put out darkness, only light can do that. And I say to you, I've also decided to stick with love. For I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems. And I'm going to talk about it everywhere I go. I know it isn't popular to talk about it in some circles today. And I'm not talking about emotional bosh when I talk about love. I'm talking about a strong, demanding love. For I've seen too much hate. I've seen too much hate on the faces of sheriffs in the South. I've seen hate on the faces of too many Klansmen, too many white citizen counselors in the South. And I want to hate myself because every time I see it, I know that it does something to their faces and their personalities, and I say to myself, that hate is too great of a burden to bear, I decided to love. If you're seeking the highest good, I think you can find it through love. And the beautiful thing is that we aren't moving wrong when we do it, because John was right. God is love. He who hates does not know God, and he who loves has the key that unlocks the door to the meaning of ultimate reality. I want to say to you, as I move to my conclusion, as we talk about it, where do we go from here? That we must honestly face the fact that the movement must address itself to the question of restructuring the whole of American society. There are 40 million poor people here, and one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising a question about economic systems, about broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic means that questions must be raised. And you see, my friends, when you deal with this, you begin to ask the question, who owns the oil? And you begin to ask the question, who owns the iron ore? And you begin to ask the question, why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that's 2/3 water? These words that must be said. Now, don't think you can bind me today. I'm not talking about communism. What I'm talking about is far beyond communism. Communism forgets that life is individual. Capitalism forgets that life is social. And the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in these theses of communism or the antithesis of capitalism, but in the higher synthesis. It is found in a higher synthesis that combines the truth of both. Now we can say, questioning the whole society, it means ultimately coming to see that the problem of racism, the problem of economic exploitation, and the problem of war are all tied together. These are triple evils that are interrelated. And if you will let me be a preacher just a little bit, one day, one night, a juror came to Jesus and he wanted to know what he could do to be saved. Jesus didn't bog down on the kind of isolated approach of what you shouldn't do. Jesus didn't say, now Nicodemus, you must stop lying. He didn't say, Nicodemus, now you must not commit adultery. He didn't say, now Nicodemus, you must stop cheating if you are doing that. He didn't say, Nicodemus, you must stop drinking liquor if you're doing that excessively. He said something altogether different, because Jesus realized something basic. If a man will lie, he will steal. And if a man will steal, he will kill. So instead of us getting bogged down on one thing, Jesus looked at him and said, Nicodemus, you must be born again. In other words, your whole structure must change. A nation that will keep people in slavery for 22 years will thingify them and make them things. Therefore, they will exploit them and poor people generally economically. And a nation that will exploit economically will have the foreign investments and everything else, and it will have to use its military might to protect them. All these problems are tied together. And I'm saying today that we must go from this convention and say, America, you must be born again. And so I conclude by saying today we have a task. Let us go out with a divine dissatisfaction. Let us be dissatisfied until the tragic walls that separate the outer city of wealth and comfort from the inner city of poverty and despair shall be crushed with the battering rams of forces of justice. Let us be satisfied until those who live on the outskirts of hope are brought into the metropolis of daily security. Let us be dissatisfied until slums are cast into junk heaps of history and every family will live in decent sanitary homes. Let us be dissatisfied until the dark yesterdays of segregated schools will be transformed into bright tomorrows of quality integrated education. Let us be dissatisfied until integration is not seen as a problem but as an opportunity to participate in the beauty of diversity. Let us be dissatisfied until men and women, however black they may be, will be judged by the basis of the content of their character, not the basis of the color of their skin. Let us be dissatisfied. Let us be dissatisfied until every state capital will be housed by a governor who will do justly, who will love mercy, and who will walk humbly with his God. Let us be dissatisfied until every city hall, justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Let us be dissatisfied until that day when the lion and the lamb shall lay down together, and every man shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and none shall be afraid. Let us be dissatisfied, and men will recognize that out of one blood God made all men to dwell upon the face of the earth. Let us be dissatisfied until that day when nobody will shout white power, when nobody will shout black power, but everybody will talk about God's power and human power. And I must confess, my friends, that the road ahead will not always be smooth. There will be rocky places of frustration, meandering points of bewilderment. There will be an inevitable, courageous civil rights worker whose life will be snuffed out by the dastardly acts of bloodthirsty mobs. But difficult and painful as it is, we must walk in on days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. When our days become dreary with low hovering clouds of despair, and when our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, let us remember that there is a creative force in this universe working to pull down the gigantic mountains of evil, a power that is able to make way out of no way and transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. Let us realize that the arc of the moral universe is long and bends it towards justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much there, Dana. Before I bring David Swope up to read an excerpt, question for the audience. Is 50 years ago a long time ago? 50 years. Most of you have a relative who is 50 years old or more. But now think about that. Some of you are 50 years old right now. We're not asking for raised hands by any means. Where I'm going with this is, okay, so if 50 years ago is not as long as we sometimes think of it, now if I start asking about your father or your grandfather or your great-grandfather, now we're just talking about 150, maybe 200 years ago max. And some of the stories that we hear from our relatives, we kind of hold to, we draw fond to a certain extent. Please allow me to read to you some of what was going on 150 to 200 years ago here in the United States that many of our relatives have been exposed to. After the Civil War ended in 1865, some states passed black codes that severely limited the rights of black people, many of whom had been enslaved. These codes limited what jobs African Americans could hold and their ability to leave a job once hired. Some states also restricted the kind of property that black people could own. The Reconstruction Act of 1867 weakened the effect of the black codes by requiring all states to uphold equal protection under the 14th Amendment, particularly by enabling black men to vote. During Reconstruction, many black men participated in politics by voting and by holding office. Reconstruction officially ended in 1877, and Southern states then enacted more discriminatory laws. Efforts to enforce white supremacy by legislation increased. In legislation, and African Americans tried to assert their rights through these legal challenges. However, this effort often led to a disappointing result in 1896 when the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that so-called separate but equal facilities, including public transport and schools, were constitutional. From this time until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is not that long ago, folks, discrimination and segregation were legal and enforceable. One of the first reactions against Reconstruction was to deprive African American men their right to vote, while the 14th and 15th Amendments prevented state legislators from directly making it illegal to vote. They devised a number of indirect measures to disenfranchise black people. The grandfather clause said that a man could only vote if his ancestor had been a voter before 1867. But the ancestors of most African American citizens had been enslaved and constitutionally ineligible to vote. Another discriminatory tactic was the literacy test applied by white county clerks. These clerks gave black voters extremely difficult legal documents to read as a test, while white men received an easy text. Even some of these are hard to read today, which is why we have lawyers reading those for us. Finally, in many places, white local government officials simply prevented potential voters from registering. By 1940, the percentage of eligible African American voters registered in the South was only 3%. As evidence of the decline, during Reconstruction, the percentage of African American voting age men registered to vote was more than 90%. African Americans face social, commercial, and legal discrimination. Theaters, hotels, and restaurants segregated them in inferior accommodations or refused to admit them at all. Shops served them last. In 1937, the Negro Motorist Green Book, a travel guide, was first published. It listed establishments where African American travelers could expect to receive unprejudiced service. Segregated public schools meant generations of African American children often received an education designed to be inferior to that of whites. With worn out or outdated books, underpaid teachers, and lesser facilities and materials, in 1954, the Supreme Court declared discrimination in education unconstitutional in Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, but it would take still another 10 years, that would be 1964, for Congress to restore full civil rights to minorities, including protection for their rights to vote. It really hasn't been that long ago, folks, and so now we are here in 2023, and we sometimes wonder why there is still such pain, depression, anxiety, suicide in many communities of people of color. Here's a little bit why. Without further ado, David Swope, come on up.
Hello, everyone. So, not necessarily scheduled, but I want to thank Peter for the opportunity to do this. I'm always taken by this kind of continuum of history in terms of how much we don't know, but yet how much we talk about what we do know. When what we're talking about, what we do know, is void of actual fact-based information, but we know it. There's a lot of history that's been withheld from us, all people, not just Black history. There's a lot of history that's been withheld from us. And so this is a good time to just be exposed to certain aspects of the truth of all of American history where best possible. I was watching about 2 years ago the inauguration of the president. It was pretty boring. Most of those are in a lot of cases, but I was watching anyway just to see, how the process was going. And then this young African-American woman walked up to the mic, and she read a poem. And I was just like blown away by how she did it and how she presented it. And her name is Amanda Gordon. And I just want to read one of her poems, and I'll give a little bit about her background, at least as it relates to this book that she's written, poems, Call Us What We Carry. It says that Amanda Gordon is the youngest presidential inaugural poet in U.S. history. She is a committed advocate for the environment, racial equality, and gender justice. In 2017, Urban World named her the first ever National Youth Poet Laureate. Gorman's performance of her poem, The Hill We Climb, at the 2021 presidential inauguration received critical acclaim and international attention. The special education of her inaugural poem debuted at #1 on the New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal bestseller list. She is also the author of the children's picture book, Change Sings. After graduating cum laude from Harvard University, she now lives in her hometown of Los Angeles. And so I'm going to read one of the poems that she posted in this book. She kind of did it in landscape formatting. It's titled America. And she says, "A house divided cannot stand. To be divided, then, is to be devastated. The fact of the matter is that our country seldom counts all who matter. This is why red seeps from our flag. We will say it again that languages matter. From the beginning, the colonized are kennings. African American, Asian American, Native American, apparently there is no white American, American and objective, American and erasure, American and a qualifier. The term split up, I and dismantled, stripped and striped. Erasure demands a lifetime of rehearsal. Do you really understand what it is to be this dispensable body? We recognize the sobs now for the flags they were. The jerk of our heads as if walking from a dream or a nightmare. You decide. This is not the nation we built, at most, not the nation we've known. No. Oh no. This is the nation we've sown. It is our right to weep for the wound we've always been. A silent shock out of the blue. A hand hung to another or a head pillowed by a shoulder is by far worth more than anything we've won or wanted. When told we can't make a difference, we still make a sound. Thank you all very much.
And so once again, I would love to bring up one of our distinguished students here, Brianna Borden, who is going to read from Melody Hobson's book, Colorblind or Color Brave. Let's please give her a hand, folks.
Hello, everyone. So, excited to be with you all today, so let's get started. So, I remember one day coming home from a birthday party where I was the only black kid invited. And instead of asking me the normally motherly questions like, did you have fun? Or how was the cake? My mother looked at me and she said, how did they treat you? I was 7. I did not understand. I mean, why would anyone treat me differently? But she knew. And she looked me right in the eyes and she said, they will not always treat you well. Now, race is one of those topics in America that makes people extraordinarily uncomfortable. You bring it up at a dinner party or in a workplace environment. It is literally the conversational equivalent of touching the third rail. There is shock, followed by a long silence. And even coming here today, I told some friends and colleagues that I plan to talk about race. And they warned me, they told me, don't do it, that there'll be huge risks in me talking about this topic, that people might think that I'm a militant black woman, and I would ruin my career. And I had to tell you, I actually for a moment was a bit afraid. Then I realized the first step to solving any problem is not to hide from it. And the first step to any form of action is awareness. And so I decided to actually talk about race. And I decided that if I came here and shared with you some of my experiences, that maybe we could all be a little less anxious and a little more bold in our conversations about race. I know how we got here. You know, there was institutionalized, at one time legalized, discrimination in our country. There's no doubt about it. And there's no question about it. But still, as I grapple with this issue, my mother's question hangs in the air for me. How did they treat you? You see, researchers have coined this term color blindness to describe a learned behavior where we pretend that we don't notice race. Now, color blindness, in my view, doesn't mean that there's no racial discrimination and there's fairness. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't ensure it. In my view, color blindness is very dangerous because it means we're ignoring the problem. There was a corporate study that said that instead of avoiding race, the really smart corporations actually deal with it head on. They actually recognize that embracing diversity means recognizing all races. But I'll be the first one to tell you, this subject matter can be hard, awkward, uncomfortable, but that's kind of the point. In the spirit of debunking racial stereotypes, The one that black people don't like to swim? Well, I'm going to tell you how much I love to swim. I love to swim so much that as an adult, I swim with the coach. And one day, my coach had me do a drill where I had to swim to one end of a 25-meter pool without taking a breath. And every single time I failed, I had to start over. And I failed a lot. By the end, I got it. But when I got out that pool, I was tired and annoyed. And I said, why are we doing breath holding exercises? And my coach looked at me and he said, Melody, that was not a breath holding exercise. That drill was to make you comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's how most of us spend our days. If we can learn to deal with our discomfort and just relax into it, we'll have a better life. So I think it's time for us to be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations about race. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, male, female, all of us, if we truly believe in equal rights and equal opportunity in America. I think we have to have real conversations about this issue. We cannot afford to be colorblind. We have to be color brave. We have to be willing as teachers and parents and entrepreneurs and scientists. We have to be willing to have proactive conversations about race with honesty and understanding and courage, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. Because our businesses and our products and our science, our research, all of that will be better with greater diversity. Now, my favorite example of color bravery is a guy named John Skipper. He runs ESPN. He's a North Carolina native, and he's white. He joined ESPN, which already had a culture of inclusion and diversity, but he took it up a notch. He demanded that every open position has a diverse slate of candidates. Now, he says the senior people in the beginning bristled, and they would come to him and say, do you want me to hire the minority? Or do you want me to hire the best person for the job? And Skipper says his answers were always the same, yes. And by saying yes to diversity. I honestly believe that ESPN is the most valuable cable franchise in the world. I think that's part of the secret sauce. Now, I can tell you about in my own industry at Aero Investments, we actually view our diversity as a competitive advantage. And that advantage can extend way beyond business. So, there is a guy named Scott Page at the University of Michigan. He is the first person to develop a mathematical calculation for diversity. He says, if you're trying to solve a really hard problem, really hard, that you should have a diverse group of people. Now, I'm sure you're sitting here and you're saying to yourself, well, I don't run a cable company, I don't run an investment firm, and I am not a dairy farmer. So, what can I do? And I'm telling you, you can be color brave. If you're part of a hiring process or an admissions process, you can be color brave. If you're trying to solve a really hard problem, you can speak up and be color brave. Now, I know a lot of people will say, but that doesn't add up. But I'm actually asking you to do something really simple. Observe your environment at work, at school, at home. I'm asking you to look around the people around you purposefully and intentionally. Invite people into your life who don't look like you, don't think like you, don't act like you, don't come from where you come from. And you might find that they will challenge your assumptions and make you grow as a person. Now, I also think that this is very important so that the next generation really understands that this progress will help them. Because they're expecting us to be great role models. America, when we have a challenge, we take it head on. We don't shrink away from it. We take a stand. We show courage. So right now, what I'm asking you to do, I'm asking you to show courage. I'm asking you to be bold. As business leaders, I'm asking you not to leave anything on the table. As citizens, I'm asking you not to leave any child behind. I'm asking you not to be colorblind, but to be color brave. So that every child knows that their future matters and that their dreams are possible. Thank you.
Love to hear from our student body in powerful excerpts. Thank you all again for your attentiveness today. We have just a couple more. I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from the National Geographic Foundation. The United States is a possible contradiction. Its founding principles embrace the ideals of freedom and equality, but it is a nation built on the systemic exclusion and suppression of communities of color. From the start, so many of this country's laws and public policies, which should serve as the scaffolding that guides progress, were instead designed explicitly to prevent people of color from fully participating. Moreover, these legal constructs are not some relic of antebellum or Jim Crow past, but rather remain part of the fabric of American policymaking. Over the centuries, even as the nation struggled to prohibit the most repugnant forms of exclusion and suppression, it neglected to uproot entrenched structural racism. The inevitable result is an American democracy that is distorted in ways that concentrate power and influence. For example, according to a new Center for American Progress analysis in 2016, 9.5 million American adults, most of whom were people of color, lacked full voting rights. The inability to fully participate in the democratic process translates into a lack of political power, the power to elect candidates with shared values, and the power to enact public policy priorities. As a result, people of color, especially Black people, continue to endure exclusion and discrimination in the electoral process more than 150 years after the abolition of slavery. Again, once again, I'm excited to bring up our distinguished faculty here on campus. And our distinguished Professor Robert Moorhead will be reading from Portia Oliwalu's excerpt, "I Cannot Wade Through the Past Without Waking the Dead." Hopefully I said that name correctly. Let's give Robert a hand, folks.
Just quickly messaging my class, because class started a minute ago. So saying, I'll be there in just a minute. So yeah, I'm reading a poem by Portia, let's see if I can get the name right, Olayiwola. She is a Chicago native and currently the poet laureate for the city of Boston. And I came across the poem while listening to the podcast there's a film called Who We Are. It's available on Netflix. Fantastic look at American history and the role of race through American history. And they have a related podcast for it. In the first episode of the podcast, she reads this poem, and I'm just like, oh my God. Like, oh my God. It was like a few months ago. I'm like, I know what I'm reading at the read-in. So let me try to do her poem justice. I cannot weigh wailing, summoning the history as the president of this country is homing the haunting, honing the howls, is homing the haunting, honing the howls, the clang of cuffs calling chains a lineage. The power of the tongue is the difference between the new world and the old, a savage and savagery, a colonist and a killer. Manifest destiny is the law of attraction, is conjuring under a different guise. Language is a spell, wish and curse. Declare independence and the war ensues. Declare the land your country and the soil gashes crimson. Declare a human as slave and no one asks how bright the color clipping her universe is. History is a complex wordsmith. The first slave ships forged in this country were named Desire, Prosperity, Fortune, and Hope. Desire was built on a summer lawn in Salem and set sail in 1637. The ship, a vessel, a belly, a black hole, sold indigenous folks to the Caribbean in exchange for Africans to slave in the colonies. A body for a body, a life for a lie, cargo to carcass. Desire from the Latin desidero, meaning to wish, to obtain, to long for, to lust after what one loathes. Learn, one man can claim desire and conquer all another man desires. One can lust after another once, and the thirst is forever in drought. America, namesaked after a conqueror, calls a slave ship hope, and it becomes a blueprint for the future. Calls a boat a fortune, and all aboard become possessed possessions. History has a way of repeating, or history itself is repeating, or history is a reaping. Ghost gun shot locking us in the open field of an eye, the bodies policed to pavement, the ballot exchanged for bullet, plantation for prison death, for life, lie in lingo, what you damn damns you. The conqueror, America, labels us a N-word, I'm not going to be saying it, and we reshape it. Endearing builds us a ghetto, and we craft culture. Label us your desire, and we say from the Latin phrase "decitus," meaning from the stars, as in emerging from the black hole of a ship's bowels, as in them folks come from a dark galaxy, as in them folks a heavenly body, celestial beings shafted, shackled constellations, night skying the ground. Thank you. Just for context, the first 4 slave ships built that launched from the United States, what would become the United States, were named Fortune, Desire, Prosperity, and Hope. I think it says a lot about how colonists imagined the role of slavery in building what would become this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Truly appreciate that. Time is drawing near. We only have 1 or 2 more excerpts, and we do have Ronald. Ronald, good morning to you. Ronald is actually an employee here on campus. Ronald, we're so glad to have you here as we're representing a diverse segment of our COD population and our COD individuals. Ronald will be reading from his own piece, which is labeled "They See What We Do: From Dreams to Nightmares." Oh, 2. So he's got a few separate ones. But let me let Robert introduce himself. Thank you. Let's give Robert a hand, folks. It is Ronald. I am just slaughtering everything today, folks. Ronald, thank you so much for being with us.
No problem. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon at this point. So this first example of literature will be From Dreams to Nightmare. I'm also a member of ASALA. I'm sure some of you have probably heard of it before. And so I've been kind of doing separate events with them on Zoom and everything like that. And so these poems have been using these, okay? When Martin Luther said he had a dream, all of our good people hollered. But then time showed up with a bucket of tears and another chain link on these collars. With another politically incorrect, rich white folk bell to answer, and far fewer eggs to fry. For the weary black family living here, America's just run dry. All soaked up was the oil of our integral innovation, and still no cause, of course, you know, for the Negro reparation. For there are no buyers, even though we do keep selling, giving up our children to streets and thieves, teachers and other people's kids, and pointless financial fees. Piped lined up to prison from the broken institution, let alone as afterthoughts like some whore in prostitution, when just yet she whooped at the famous preacher man who gutted our communities clean for integration's hand. And we were supposed to be at peace. We supposed to live our best lives. And the truthless white man who suggests that we alone should survive. But yeah, Martin Luther had a dream, and all who knew it knows the justful injustice of it all, the twisting of that good man's words, where any chump can have a civil right, now amounts to nothing but for birds. Just yet we dared. Just yet we hoped for the cause of right and fair. But if we thought it was worse before civil rights, well, today it's gone from dream to nightmare. This next poem is entitled, They See What We Do. They see what we do, they see what we have, and then they kill us. They give ours to other cultures to imitate us, and then they kill us, and that repeats itself. We loyal to them, but then kill each other. We don't unify the brothers. Our kids won't know us. Their lives don't hold us, and every time you turn around, white folks and their allies smother us. The Negro Americans invent it, and white folks take it. We create anything, and the Asians shake it. We sing and dance naturally while the Latins fake it. The Lord said not to, and we still put bacon in it. They see what we do, they see what we have, and then they kill us. They give ours to other cultures to imitate us, and then they kill us, and that repeats itself. We are not the world. We are the few. A beautiful, kind Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Hebrew. Merciful, royal, regal, all. But only notice it whence we fall, only to grasp it when it's said and done, to live out truth out on the run. It's not about hating them, he, they, she, whatever, but loving on us and building up each other. To move finally in one voice of united accord, setting pieces right for use on all the chessboards. And every time we begin to stir ourselves, everyone take notice. We are entertainment for Jews, fodder for whites, a side dish in politics led by our black lookalikes. They see what we do, they see what we have, and then they kill us. They give ours to other cultures to imitate us, and then they kill us, and that repeats itself. Our mothers have abandoned us, otherwise we'd still be alive. We blame our black father even as we accept the white lies. We send our precious children blindly into the public place where they quickly exchange grace for disgrace. They quickly sell their inheritance for a measly portion of bread and soup, duped by the enemy of skirts and suits, slighted by a system of means and goats. But you let your poor baby get strangled by the throat. You let your beautiful children go out and be changed. You let them come home and forget the Lord's name. They see what we do. They see what we have, and then they kill us. They give ours to other cultures to imitate us, and then they kill us, and that repeats itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronald. That was very powerful. As we draw near to the conclusion of this phenomenal event, actually we may be giving you a few minutes back for sure. I want to extend the opportunity for those of you who may have a piece to read right now. If you desire to, please go back into the back to see Christine Kickles, who's going to raise her hand right now and wave. If you have even a short piece to read, please go back there and talk to her, and she will allow you to come on up. And before that, without further ado, please allow me to read an excerpt from, again, the National Geographic Society. You know, as a business and entrepreneurship professor, I am a student of capitalism. And let's just face it, the United States was built on the shoulders of capitalism at all costs. And unfortunately, the cost was a group of people, Africans from Western Africa. But please allow me to read you this excerpt, which gives a little bit of history of, you know, the wealth of this nation. Sometimes the wealth that we take for granted on a regular basis. I'm hoping that this excerpt here will give you a little bit more insight as you move forward in your future. If the Confederacy had been a separate nation, it would have ranked as the 4th richest in the world at the start of the Civil War. The slave economy had been very good to American prosperity. By the start of the war, the South was producing 75% of the world's cotton and creating more millionaires per capita in the Mississippi River Valley than anywhere else in the nation. Enslaved workers represented Southern planters' most significant investment and the bulk of their wealth. Building a commercial enterprise out of the wilderness required labor and lots of it. For much of the 1600s, the American colonies operated as agricultural economies, driven largely by indentured servitude. Most workers were poor, unemployed laborers from Europe who, like others, had traveled to North America for a new life. In exchange for their work, they received food and shelter, a rudimentary education, and sometimes a trade. But by 1680, the British economy improved and more jobs became available in Britain. During this time, slavery had become a morally, legally, and socially acceptable institution in the colonies, endorsed by the Roman Catholic Church. As the number of European laborers coming to colonies dwindled, enslaving Africans became more widely acceptable. With ideal climate and available land, property owners in the southern colonies began establishing plantation farms for cash crops like rice, tobacco, and sugarcane, enterprises that required increasing amounts of labor. To meet the need, wealthy planters turned to traders who imported ever more human chattel to the colonies, the vast majority from West Africa. As more enslaved Africans were imported and an upsurge in fertility rates expanded the inventory, a new industry was born, the slave auction. These open markets where humans were inspected like animals and bought and sold to the highest bidder, proved an increasingly lucrative enterprise. By the mid-19th century, a skilled, able-bodied enslaved person could fetch up to $2,000, although prices varied by state. Slave labor had become so entrenched in the Southern economy that nothing, not even the belief that all men were created equal, could dislodge it. When delegates to the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, they were split on the moral question of human bondage and man's inhumanity to man, and not on its economic necessity. At the time, there were nearly 700,000 enslaved people living in the United States, worth many millions in today's dollars. On the topic of slavery arose during the deliberations over calculating political representation in Congress. The southern states of Georgia and the Carolinas demanded that each enslaved person be counted along with whites. The northern states balked, saying it gave southern states an unfair advantage. Their compromise, delegates agreed that each enslaved person would count as 3/5 of a person, giving the South more representation, and that the slave trade would not be banned 20 years hence, a concession to northern states that had abolished slavery several years earlier. Do we have someone else who is reading an excerpt? Yes, we do. We have one more person. Again, thank you all for your attentiveness today. Without further ado, please come forward. Remind me your full name again? Remind me your full name again. Tom Mazzarella, ladies and gentlemen.
I am Tom, and I'm a huge baseball fan. Huge. Anyway, without talking about Black history, you have to know Jackie Robinson. So I'm going to read a poem about him. And I really was very worried about doing this. Anyway, so he never asked to be a hero. For him, playing ball would be just fine. Potentially, his chance was less than zero to overcome the black-white racist line. Unlike Duke, DuPage, and Mickey, Jackie entered through the back doors. The stage was set for Mr. Ricky, for Robinson to fight that Civil War. Sports, they say, mirrors society, so they should have hung their heads in shame for what was then America's propriety brought prejudice to every game. The Brooklyn Bums, at long last, found salvation when Robinson's talents were revealed. With the awesome double play combination, Reese and Jackie brought to Ebbets Field, stealing fans' hearts with baseball fire, displaying skills in every way. Robinson played with such desire, stealing bases almost every day. They could never expect from him the expected. He turned the most racist hate to love. And finally, he was the most respected, respect that came from more than a bat and a glove. For Jackie, baseball was more than just a game. He opened doors for Campy, Mays, and others. Number 42, now in the Hall of Fame, proved men of all colors could play in life as brothers. He never asked to be a hero. And just on the list here, some of these people I guarantee nobody knows who these guys are. But anyway, Duke is not John Wayne. That is Duke Snyder. DuPage is DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle. Mr. Ricky was the guy that also had death threats, just like Jackie did, for hiring him to be the first African-American baseball player. And the Brooklyn Bums were the Brooklyn Dodgers, and when Jackie got to the team, they hadn't won for years. They were the Bums. He got there, he played, he was the Rookie of the Year, and they won the World Series in his first year. And then there's Campy, that's Roy Campanella, the first black catcher in the major leagues, and Willie Mays is one of the greatest players anyway. So that's it. So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we do have our final excerpt from W.E.B. Du Bois from Carissa Adedeji. Carissa, hopefully I'm saying your last name correctly. Come on up. Let's give her a round of applause, folks. And thank you so much for your attentiveness today. After Carissa, David Swope will come up to conclude this 2023 edition of the National of African American Read-In.
Hi, I'm actually going to read a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, We Wear Masks. We wear a mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human glue. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and our mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should we, the world, be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear masks. We smile, but, O great Christ, we cry, to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. Thank you.
So that concludes our reading for this time. We're so grateful for all of those who've just taken the time to come. Give yourselves a round of applause for those who are here. I am in the midst of history. History comprises both heritage and lineage. My family is with me. My cousin is with me here. My mom is with me. If you all can raise your hand. That's right here up front. Yep, that's part of history. And so we just want to, again, extend the thanks to all the professors who came out and brought their classes. I see Dr. Mark Curtis Chavez back there, our provost. Raise your hand. It's good to see you. To the Dean of Student Development, Dr. Natanya Montez. That's my supervisor, y'all, right there. Raise your hand. And definitely another thanks to Dr. Peter James for quarterbacking this whole thing and then giving us all of that insight to history. If we could put our hands together for Peter. And again to Christine. Thank you, Christine Kickles, and the library. And then to the AV department, the audio video department. They are here at just about everything that we do, and they always help out in ways that I probably never think of or things that I never think of. They're always here to do that. So for all the readers, thank you all for your participation. I believe there's still some more refreshments. And I always challenge you all with this. You want to take a look at you can use the QR code if you want to scan. Thank you, Josh. To see what the remaining list of events are for Black History Month, you can scan that QR code and it'll take you to the website where you can see all of the events and programming that we have scheduled for the rest of the month. I would challenge you all with this. Meet somebody that you don't know. Get out of your comfort zone for about 60 seconds and share something with someone that you don't know. Meet somebody. And that's the way we can become better, by sharing outside of ourselves. Cool? Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.